Welcome back. Authorities are looking into a lengthy anti-immigrant screed posted online Saturday that may have been written by the El Paso gunman. Like the writings of the Tree of Life gunman in Pittsburgh, both works echo President Trump's rhetoric warning of an invasion at the southern border. While the epidemic of gun deaths predates the president, these cases are raising uncomfortable questions about the impact of his inflammatory rhetoric, especially when combined with the rise of white supremacist violence during his term.
I will say that a majority of the domestic terrorism cases that we've investigated are motivated by some version of what you might call white supremacist violence, but it includes other things as well.
Joining me now is NBC's Ben Collins, our reporter who specializes on this beat, difficult beat on the internet for NBC News. Jim Cavanaugh, former special agent in charge at the ATF and an MSNBC terrorism analyst. And Nate Snyder, he was a senior counterterrorism official in the Obama administration. Thank you all for being here. Jim, let me start with you, just big picture here. What is causing the phenomenon that the FBI director was talking about there, that increasingly the threats that they are seeing here in the United States, the domestic terrorism cases, are motivated by white supremacy or white nationalism?
Well, white supremacy is ascendant. We are back really, truly, Casey, in the 60s. I went on the police in the early 70s. I know that era. I chased the Klan and Nazis all through my career. You know, I looked yesterday on the website at the Southern Poverty Law Center just to count the number of civil rights martyrs that are on their memorial. And this is instructive, really, for all of us. From 1954 to 1968, 38 people were killed. That includes the 4 little girls at the Baptist Church, the 3 in the Mississippi Freedom Riders case, Vernon Dahmer, Medgar Evers, all the civil rights martyrs. In 14 years, there was 38. We have exceeded this number. We've grossly exceeded this number with the Emmanuel Church shooting, with El Paso, with the Sikh temple, with the Pittsburgh synagogue. And if you add in even these overseas killings with New Zealand and Anders Breivik, I mean, the numbers are revolting. We are worse in the murders of minority citizens than we were in the 60s. And so we're in a very bad place. White supremacy is ascendant, many reasons, certainly digital hate, recruiting on the internet, but they get away with the violence because of the silence. It was Dr. King who said, we will long forget the words of our enemies, but we'll remember the silence of our friends. And the silence is deafening from the political class up there. There's people in the Senate that should just leave, just resign, because you're silent on the issue facing America like this. So white supremacy is ascendant. It feels emboldened. It feels strong. It feels supported. It's doing everything, Casey. We see government actions that they would themselves do. They would put immigrants in cages. They would deny them everything. They would let them sit there. They would call them an infestation. They would have a Nuremberg-style rally march in Virginia, like in the 30s. How can we believe this is not worse than the 60s? We need to wake up America, and you need to speak up, or you need to vote. I would close with just this one thought at the beginning of your section here. If you were in Birmingham in 1963, and they beat the Klansmen, the Freedom Riders beat the Klansmen at the bus station, they killed the 4 little girls at the Birmingham church, they turned the fire hoses on the marchers, which side are you on? Bull Connor's side, the police commissioner? Are you on the side of the people just trying to vote or sit at the lunch counter? Which side are you on? You got to pick a side. And we're there now. We're there today. There's no choice. You got to pick a side. And if you pick silence, then we know what side you're on.
Nate Snyder, how is this environment that Jim is talking about contributing to this, the rise that we are seeing? I mean, you have practiced this relatively recently in trying to combat these attacks. Is it, in fact, the president's rhetoric contributing to this? How much does that play into what we're seeing happening?
Well, I think that's a very important question. When you're talking about the president, just look at where he's coming from. He's the leader of the free world. He has the largest megaphone on the globe, and he is citing violent domestic terrorist-based tropes and narratives, and doing it openly for political benefit. Words and narratives have consequences, and we're seeing this in real time. We're seeing it unfold. I think in the previous panel, the narrative itself was trying to be identified. This is a known white supremacist, violent domestic terrorist narrative. It's called the Great Replacement. I think Jim mentioned Anders Breivik. Breivik cited it. The attacker in El Paso cited it. The attacker in Christchurch cited it. San Diego, Pittsburgh, I could keep going. And the fact that you're seeing these narratives and tropes being espoused by the president and the way he's doing it, you could put it side by side by the screeds and the narratives in them, and there would be no discernible difference. So I think until the president comes out and says he is against domestic terrorism, he didn't say that today. He is against domestic terrorism, and he vehemently says that, then maybe we're heading in the right direction. Unfortunately, that may not be the case, but we'll see. I think we'll see proof is in the pudding when it comes to the rallies, when it comes to Twitter. But I think, unfortunately, the remarks he gave earlier, frankly, were a bit of lipstick on a pig.
Ben Collins, you spend more time than I would ever want to looking at what is going on in the darkest corners of the internet that have inspired so many of these attackers. What do they hear when they hear the president say things like what he said today, where he does talk about condemning racism, bigotry, and white supremacy, but also didn't seem to take the next step in talking about how his own rhetoric may have contributed, and how, in past incidents, he talked about good people on both sides of Charlottesville, for example. How does that resonate in these places where all of this stuff starts?
So with overt white nationalists, they view this as like, they view this as, this is what we've been talking about for years. Why isn't this guy doing anything about it? They take it into their own hands because they don't think that he's going to do it. They think he's soft on this, which is kind of interesting. So that's why they have fomented a race war in their own space that they are going to act upon. That's what they think. They think that he agrees with them. That's generally the belief there, but they don't think he is doing enough, and they think they have to take it into their own hands. Like, for example, the Tree of Life shooter said, "Screw the optics, I'm going in," before he did it. Do you know what that means? They know what it looks like. They know what generally people believe about this sort of thing, and they know that whatever happens is going to be written off as a false flag or a conspiracy theory or something like that. But they also really desperately want an exclusively white country. That's what's going on in this place. And if we don't really tackle this very soon in a way that combines the executive branch and law enforcement and just civic engagement as well, we're gonna start. I mean, I was really worried about this a couple of months ago now, because there's a playbook. There's a manifesto that you post before you on a specific website before you go and you participate in the civil war that you're gonna pop up somewhere, and only you're armed. That's their game plan. And that's what they see. They see a call to action in a lot of these words, and then they go and they act.
And what, Ben, is the answer to stopping this? I mean, we know 8chan was down for a while. There was another company that kicked them off today. How do we stop it?
It's a long process. First of all, we have to get a public understanding about how important this is, that kids can get radicalized from basic stuff. If your kid is on a YouTube tutorial of a video game or something like that, not even a video games don't matter, on a bodybuilding forum or something, you got to track where they're headed, because they might wind up down a white nationalist path totally without making any single decision. So we need people to start paying attention to that. We need social media providers to actually realize that they have a problem in the spread of this stuff. We need the government to start monitoring very specific, like when somebody posts a manifesto, we now know what that means. So this is going to take a government civic engagement. It's going to take everything that we have to get over this thing, but it's going to take some time.
All right, Ben, Jim, Nate, thank you all very much for coming on tonight. Thank you for your perspective.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.